Wow, wow, wow. You know, we have 2E in the universe now, and we are going to be digging into it for a couple weeks with none other than the game mechanic designer for Star Trek Adventures, Nathan Dowdell. But before we start, I'm Michael Dismuke. Welcome to Continuing Conversations, where we talk everything Star Trek Adventures and Captain's Log. I'm also a blogger on Continuing Missions, which is the #1 website for Star Trek Adventures and Captain's Log, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures and lead writer on Captain's Log myself. And of course, this show is not a show unless we have Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Mendipius Entertainment, and also the Captain's Log solo RPG, also published by Mendipius Entertainment. Also co-host on this here show with Michael these last couple years. It's 130 odd episodes strong, moving on to 200. It's going to happen at some time because we have second edition out now, and we've got all kinds of stuff to talk about with the blogs that are coming out and the quick start that's out, and then coming soon the core book and the toolkit and all kinds of other cool stuff heading on into the end of this year and then even into next year. So lots and lots to talk about. And we have a couple of special guests with us tonight. They are not strangers to this show, but happy to have them back once again. I will have Nathan Dowdell introduce himself.
A hearty Nuknech to all of you. For those who don't speak Klingon, that's what do you want? It's the nearest thing to hello. An exciting opportunity to finally talk about second edition in a relatively unfettered manner, rather than having to choose my words carefully and avoid giving too much away.
Exactly. We're all raw today.
It's finally out there. I mean, not completely because the core book's not out yet, but everything, the blogs are coming out, so we can actually talk about it a little bit more. And then also our other special guest, Al Spader. Please introduce yourself.
How's it going, everyone? Al Spader. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. I was the lead writer on the Federation Klingon tactical campaign. I also work on some other stuff as well, and I'm excited to dig into 2E. This is going to be great.
Yeah. So we're going to start out with one of our most favorite mechanics, which is threat and momentum. And who better to define threat and momentum than Nathan Dowdell? So go ahead and first, in case someone has just picked up Star Trek Adventures 2E for the first time and they're scared to run a game or they're about to join a game and they're not quite understanding the mechanics, can you define it for us, Nathan? Why did you design this mechanic into the game?
Part of the reason I designed the mechanic into the game is because it's a part of the 2D20 system that predated Star Trek Adventures. But I've felt from the beginning that it was a solid thing to have for a Star Trek game because it represents, as much as anything else, the unknown. It's a potential for unexpected and unknown and unforeseen things to happen. The bigger that pool of threat builds, the more that could suddenly change or suddenly develop or escalate in a different way. The greater potential for those things to happen. If anything else, it often gets framed as a way for the GM to do nasty things to the players. And to an extent, that's true, in the sense that you kind of, in a story like the ones told in the Star Trek franchise, you want difficult and challenging and complicated things to happen to the characters. Threat's a mechanism for doing that, but it's also a mechanism for just making things exciting, making things dramatic, making things tense. It's at the core of it. Tension is the point of threat. It's a way to that pile of tokens is all the things that could go wrong, and the GM then spends them to make those things happen, to bring those things into the game, and to make the session more than just business as usual.
Good. And then what about momentum?
Momentum, at its core, is keeping hold of your successes and building upon them later. It's not just yourself, but as a group, as a team. It's that ability to just abstractly say, I did really well at this, and there's going to be a consequence for it beyond just what I succeeded at. My succeeding at this thing now creates more opportunities for us going forward, creates more chances for us to succeed, creates ways that we can take advantage of this situation further. It's an opportunity to thrive, to turn success into more success.
Good. Now, Jim, before we started recording, we were talking about a lot of the trepidation you experience on social media when talking to people about the use of threat. You want to just let's tackle that right off the bat so that we can dive right into it and instruct game masters and players why it's not something to be afraid of, in a sense, of using and utilizing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it really excited me about Star Trek Adventures back in 2016 when I first got the playtest documentation was this whole momentum threat economy and how players can manipulate it and game masters can manipulate it. And game masters, instead of just like coming up with stuff off the top of their head, right, and just dropping it into the game, like, oh, you successfully cleared this room, and oh, there's secret surprise, there's a bunch of bad guys jumping out from a secret door or something, and you're like, oh, I thought we were done, but now there's even more stuff, right? So instead of just a game master coming up with gotchas on the fly and kind of by like GM fiat, right, there was actually some checks and balances in place, right, for the game master to spend it on, right? But I really like threat. But on social media, of course, a lot of players are coming from different games and don't have experience with 2D20. So in their head, it sounds like, just by reading their posts and stuff, that there's a little bit of a perception of an adversarial relationship between the players and the game master, where the players are afraid of the game master kind of doing those gotchas, where if the players try something and give the game master a couple points of threat, the game master is going to use those points of threat to really put the vice down on the player characters, right? Which, like Nathan said, they're kind of going to do. But it's not like, oh, haha, gotcha. Now I've just killed your player character. You grow up a new character or whatever. It's like really integral to the game. But if you think about Star Trek as a narrative, property or narrative experience, if you've watched, I mean, you may not be a writer and you might watch the show, but like subconsciously, how story beats work, how tension rises, how dramatic things happen. And you might be watching an episode and in the back of your mind, you may not consciously realize it. You may think to yourself, oh, this would be a good point for a plot twist, or this might be a good place for a little gotcha for the characters before they go into the commercial break for the next act, right? And sure enough, something happens, some dramatic thing happens, there's a plot twist, there's a sudden reversal, and that's in the game, that's the game master spending threat to make things more exciting, more interesting, more dramatic. So it's important for players, I think, to understand that this is a collaborative game experience, and one way the game master can help make it more exciting and more dramatic is by spending that threat. Certainly, Al and Nathan, I'd love to hear your perspective on that piece of it.
Yeah, I've over many rewatches of the original series, I've come to think of those moments where it's the Romulan theme from Balance of Terror, but it shows up in so many other episodes. That music, to me, is the threat pool. That sinister, creepy. It's not action music, but it's showing that something bad is happening, something sinister is happening, something unknown or unforeseen, some problem has occurred, and that just is happening. You want those things to happen in Star Trek. You want these problems, perhaps even insurmountable problems, to pop up during the course of a session of play, and then you want to see the characters overcome those problems, because that's the fun of it. It was a term coined by John Rogers, who's the showrunner on Leverage, also it's one of my favorite TV shows outside of Star Trek. There's the term of competence porn, where you see extremely capable characters solving impossible problems stylishly. And I think Star Trek feeds into that type of genre as well. You want to put the big problems, as a GM, you want to put the big problems up in front of your players so that you can see them beat those problems.
Yeah, and I think being really explicit with a group the first time you meet with them during your session 0 or during the first few minutes when you're at a convention, saying Star Trek Adventures is meant to show how an episode of Star Trek progresses. So therefore, we are going to throw a little wrenches at you here and there, but we're also going to build to this climax. And that climax might not necessarily be a big shootout, in the brig. It might be, trying to repair your engine so that you can go to warp. So I think like setting that expectation up front when you are running a game will help your players buy into the idea of threat as a tool used to, show trust between the players and the GM.
Yeah, having played recently a 2D20 game with Al Spader, and usually I'm the forever GM, but I actually got to play in a game he had designed, 2D20, which also has a threat momentum thing. And I really like using threat as a player. I like using it anytime I'm doing something that's risky, to show that I understand there's an inherent danger here, and to make the other players kind of have the hair stand on end, thinking like, wow, this person's taking a risk here. And Al knows I'm generously giving threat during the game, because I like that tension. I want people to be like, what are you doing? Exactly. If you were playing this game, or if you were really in the situation, you'd be looking at this other character going, what are you doing? And that to me is the threat feeling that I want in the game. You got a lot of threat, didn't you, from me, Al?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Michael. I think that's something that would be. I think I would love to be able to teach that to more players. Right, is to be willing to get into that state, that flow state of where you are willingly giving the game master threat. You're earning momentum by doing things, right? Because like especially in Star Trek, when you're watching the show, like Starfleet characters, I mean, characters in general, it doesn't have to be Starfleet, Klingons, Romulans, whatever. Like the main characters on the show, or the key protagonists, they're on the show, they're doing stuff, right? They're not sitting back thinking about what they're going to do, or they're not being hesitant about what they need to do. They're actually doing stuff. They're being very proactive, and they're trusting their fellow officers, and they're trusting themselves and their skill sets to go try things. And they may fail spectacularly, but at least they're trying, because of course, when you try something and you fail, hopefully you've learned something, and then you can apply that to your next task, right? So that's one of the things I've been, especially in the last couple of months, I think, as I've seen new players come into social media to talk about the game, and they're hesitant about what they're doing, and they're not sure about the game and how it's different from other game systems, is like, if you're feeling a lack of momentum at your game table, and you're momentum starved, that might mean that you as players are not attempting to do enough things. Like, get into it, be willing to try things, try fail. Ask the game master, can I do this? Can I do that? Or be even more proactive and say, I'm going to try to do this. What do I need to make that happen, right? And just say what you're going to do, instead of continually asking or just waiting for permission to do something.
Well, here's a little sneaky tip for players. Suppose you have no momentum, and you're willing to buy up to 3 dice, additional dice for your hand. It's going to cost you 6 threat. That's true. But if you do this on, a difficulty 1 task, all that extra success becomes momentum for your pool. So yeah, you went ahead and gave the GM a lot of threat, but at the same time, you got a lot of momentum, so that now you can start manipulating the story. I think that, momentum and threat is about who gets to the tug of war between the GM and players to manipulate the story in their favor, right? And so those are some tips. Spin that threat. You're bound to get some momentum back and earn yourself some flexibility.
And to that point, I love it, Nathan. If you could talk a little bit about some of the changes that you've made going from first edition into second edition, about how much more, not to say more important, momentum is now, but that there are so many new ways and tweaked ways that people can spend momentum now, not just on tasks, but just like in general. There's so many things that you can do with momentum that you couldn't before, or maybe that weren't highlighted before. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, about how much more important momentum is now.
Let's do that. Can I pause for a second? Let's do that in a moment, because there's a lot of new things, including we could even throw in determination. Well, no, we can't do that yet. Yeah, but let's do that as a kind of a help list at the end. Al, you were about to say something real quick. I want to get.
No, I was actually going to pass the exact same question off to Nathan, believe it or not.
Okay.
And Jim jumped right in. So, because I think it's really fascinating, and it's very clearly a second edition change that Momentum has so much more you can do with it.
See, I would say here that as far as I'm concerned, there aren't that many changes to Momentum. It's largely the same as it always was. I don't really think. I think there's a couple of extra options here and there that feed off of other changes. But if anything, what changed more arguably was threat, because of the way it interacts with NPCs and damage now. But Momentum itself didn't change all that much, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
Yep. My apologies. I may have been thinking of threat. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, and that's what I want to talk about, because I want to talk about what is that hasn't changed, and then go into what is, because one of the things with threat and GM, again, this is for new GMs listening and maybe have never used threat before. It's not about just increasing the hit power of the enemies. That's very D&D thing, like where you spend or Marvel superheroes spend karma in order to increase the power of a hit or something. Threat here has different things. Like the reversal is one of my favorite mechanics that I talk about, where you spend 2 threat per PC in the scene, and you can then create one of those, like Jim was saying, dun dun dun, cliffhangers, go to commercial, and really get to know the way to use threats, because and then there's well, I'm not going to get into that. I have to separate my mind from starter kit to core rulebook. There's some other really cool things that are going to come out into ways to use threat that are new, which are really about setting the scene and the GM having control over the plot and pushing people through the mission. So with that said, now what new things have been introduced when it comes to threat that can be announced? I'm afraid to talk because I'm afraid I'm going to give a spoiler. So Nathan is more familiar with it.
I think the biggest part would be on the NPC side, where the way it interacts with the new damage mechanics in combat, where player characters have spirit that they can spend to avoid injuries. We didn't want to have that same tracking on NPCs individually. So instead, NPCs, and this is actually based on an earlier draft where before stress was added in. It's called Spirit in Dreams and Machines, where I got the same mechanic, where I used the mechanic before. Before we'd introduced stress in its current form to second edition, all avoiding injuries was done by adding to threat. For players and NPCs would spend from it, and it just resulted in combats dragging on forever. We changed it up a little bit so that player characters had their stress pool to avoid injuries with, but we kept NPCs spending threat to avoid injuries, because it meant that essentially the scene as a whole has hit points in that sense. The enemy can stick around for as long as it is dramatically appropriate, and to grease the wheels a little bit there. NPCs of the notable and nemesis NPCs, anybody that's got a name tag basically has a pool of personal threat that they can make use of, not just for avoiding injuries, but also for carrying out whatever diabolical plans they have. Which obviously is it's a little bit of a bump over what they over what GMs may have had before. Should help those GMs who might find that their players are a little bit reluctant or a little bit and find themselves a bit threat starved, and allows a potent NPC to have almost an outsized effect on the scene. They're the antithesis of the player characters, so they should have a dramatic effect not just on themselves but on the shape of the situation around them. And it does mean that they can stick around in a fight a bit longer. They can call in reinforcements more easily. That if you're suddenly dealing with if you're suddenly confronted with the likes of Gul Dukat or the Borg Queen, then you should be expecting more than just that person. And having personal threat be a default thing across notable and major NPCs helps us with that, just by giving the GM a little bit more oomph with those characters.
Yeah, I love. Oh, go ahead, Al.
I was just going to ask a question about personal threat in general, Nathan. So do you see, like, obviously, if I'm Gold Ducat, I can spend my own threat to buy dice if I need to. Do you see it as though Gold Ducat could also spend 2 personal threat to create a scene trait, just as a player character would?
Yeah, arguably they could use it in the same way that the players' characters use their own saved up momentum. I would say, because it's coming from the character themselves, it should have to come from something that the character has done. I'm a very big believer in cause and effect when it comes to describing how momentum and threat work. There should be a natural narrative link between what the action is you've just done and the outcome that you get, even if the points themselves don't really care about that description. I know that a lot of the earlier complaints about threat is that it does feel sometimes like it comes out of nowhere. Like these things are just happening, and I think having that causal link in the fiction makes it go down a lot more smoothly. I've used there's an example that I've used countless times of, you're sneaking through an enemy ship, or an enemy base, trying to remain undetected. You get detected, and an enemy runs for a comm panel and sounds the alarm. The action of sounding the alarm adds to threat. That threat you can immediately spend on reinforcements. Is a natural. You could do those things anyway, but there's a natural story link that makes sense to the players.
Yeah, I think there was a conversation on one of the social channels a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, I don't remember now, where someone was trying to work through, like, okay, I can spend threat to make these things happen, make these scene changes or these trait changes happen or whatever, but how does that work? And it's like, well, no, you have to add it in the story reason. It doesn't just happen by fiat and all of a sudden things are different in the scene. You need to create that story. You and your players need to create that story reasoning behind it. So that's a great clarification, Nathan. And Michael, just reflecting on what you were saying earlier about how much you love reversals. Reversals are one of my favorite threat spends as well. And when Nathan sent me the initial draft of the revised core book, and I saw that he had added personal threat to NPCs, all the idea bulbs were going off in my head, because, like, ooh, I could have a Gold Ducat or a Kai Wynn or a Board Queen or some like big character like that come into a scene, do something dramatic, and all by themselves have enough threat maybe to spend to create a reversal, right? And all of a sudden, and it's all because of that character, right? Because, like, on DS9, when Wynn or Ducat showed up, things were gonna totally go sideways for the player characters, the main characters, and to have that power built into an NPC now in a way that wasn't there before. Because, like, even if you're a threat starved game master, all of a sudden you bring in one of your heavy hitters, you got threat to an extent.
Yeah,
so build that story reasoning into, so that it's that character creating the situation, as opposed to it just happening, right?
Yeah, I want to just emphasize what Jim's saying. So everyone, this is a key moment listening right now. Big character, major NPC comes in, they bring with them a bag of threat, and you can look at their data file and see exactly how much threat they drag into the room with them. I just want you to emphasize that, because this is a big switch to 2E. And if your players have been playing 1E for a while and they're watching the threat pool, and then all of a sudden you just add 8 tokens there, they may be like, what the heck are you doing? So make sure to be ready to show that rule to them.
Yeah, although
there is enough.
Sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
There is another aspect to that, and it was present to an extent in first edition, but I think it can shine a little bit more now. Those notable and major NPCs, they've got values too, and while they don't have determination, they can spend threat in order to get the benefits of a point of determination. But the same works in reverse, which means that they can refill their personal threat, little bit by having their values work against them.
Wow.
Which adds to the role play for those important characters.
That's like Dr. Doom level. His ego takes him down all the time. I love that.
Yeah, I love it.
There is no small part that the way that Doom, the way that threat works is based at least a little bit on the Doom pool from Marvel Heroic Roleplay.
That's awesome. And I did want to add just one little nuance. It's not that the notable and major player characters come in and add their threat to the threat pool. They have their own threat pool. So it's like you got the mainline threat pool, and then the NPCs have their own separate. It's not, they just don't dump it into the overall threat pool. And I guess my one question for Nathan then is just in the course of playtesting, how did you effectively keep track of the two separate threat? Well, you got your main threat pool, and then you got your individual threat pools. Did you just have like a separate stack on the player NPC, or were you playing it online and you just had a separate ticker for them? Like, what's a good, I guess, for lack of a better term, best practice for game masters to manage this new little extra thing that they'll be keeping track of?
I've tended to have it as a separate small pile off to one side. I typically play without a GM screen because I find it gets in the way when I'm at a table, and I want to be able to reach those piles of resources in the middle of the table. So I just got the main pile of threat, and I normally have like the tokens stacked up because 2 years as a croupier, I want to see the chips in a nice neat stack, and then I'll have a couple of extra stacks for the one or two notable or major NPCs that might be in a scene. It's unlikely that there's going to be a lot of them, so it's not too big a problem just to have those little extra piles of tokens just there, because the minor NPCs won't have any of their own. So
I have a question right before we move off that subject. I'm sorry, I know you wanted to say, but I have a question just for clarity. Are you saying that my major NPC, when they come in with their stack of a threat, can they, and I as a GM, not use that threat and instead spin from the general threat pool in ways that benefit them?
So essentially, for anything that affects that NPC or that has come from that NPC's actions, you can spend the NPC's own threat. They have their own little pool that's for them, and anything relating to them, they can spend their threat points on. But they can still, the main threat pool is still available and still does all its normal things. It's just this NPC is important. They have their own.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to throw in, Jim, for keeping track, for people that like using maps and miniatures, if you have Gold Ducat walk in on your map, you just set that pile of threat tokens right next to them, right? And so they can see that that's there, and have a central location, so they know that is dedicated to just him. Meanwhile, the regular momentum and threat pools maybe are at the top of the map or just in front of the GM.
I love that, because then it doesn't question if they choose to use the reversal for an escape. Like, you're not capturing me, beam out, using that threat. So I really love that mechanic.
And don't we see that trope all the time? And I think, and that's actually something that I love about threat is, and momentum to an extent, is like, if you've watched enough Star Trek, the tropes, like you see them all the time because they keep popping up, and it's like the threat spends and the momentum spends are a great way to just bring those tropes right into the game. Like, if that you're in a dramatic situation, maybe something's going to go wrong with your phase, or all of a sudden the power cell's drained, or something's happened, or you get ready to do the dramatic beam out, and there's some sort of interference or something happens. Like, that's just such a classic Star Trek thing to you have the technology, but something happens to take the technology away, and then you've got to figure out another problem. That's such a great way to spend threat and go, oh yeah, this is the time for that trope to come right in. And I guess that gets into the storytelling component of it too, right? Where you're not just mechanically spending threat, you're actually weaving a story into it and explaining why this is happening, not just because you're spending threat. It's because there's a story thing happening within it.
Yeah, and I want to add to this too, because this is something I have to remind. I'm not going to say remind my players of. I'm going to be emphasizing a lot. If they have the talent of, say, bold security, bold command, bold science, and so they're adding to threat, you have to use threat to buy an additional die if you're using the bold talent. I'm not giving that away for free anymore. You have to tell me what is happening and what bold, like, for instance, maybe you're flying the ship, maybe you're coming too close to an asteroid. You're going to go so close to it that you're using bold con. So that way I know you're giving me threat. Maybe you're giving me 3 threat to buy 2 dice for that. I'm telling you right now, going forward, I'm likely going to slap a complication on you, like you hit that nacelle and you got some damage on your port nacelle. So I think that's something that GMs need to think about. If someone's throwing at you bold threat, or using the bold talent, that threat, I'm narratively going to say that that trait that comes, a negative trait that comes from that, has some relation to your character taking more risk.
I generally do that. I don't necessarily say you need to provide a description every time you buy dice from by adding to threat, but I will say I will make it clear to my players that if they are buying dice by adding to threat, it's because they're taking risks. It's because they're being they're being that little bit more reckless, that little bit more daring, and sometimes that will pay off. As Kirk has said, risk is our business. Sometimes I'll let it slide and I'll just take the points and I'll keep them for later. Sometimes the risks pay off. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah. But I like it. You think about Captain Kirk, like, this guy takes a risk, but of course he ends up like clinging to the side of a cliff. He made the jump, but it's, he hindered himself a little bit. Maybe he ended up prone by the time he ended up on the other side. So I want that Indiana Jones Captain Kirk feel to this risk taking. Like, they're getting beat up, but they're going to win, but they're going to get beat up all the way, to the end.
Yeah.
This is an area where the new terrain rules can play in nicely as well. The speeding up terrain is borrowed from a somewhat tried and tested take from the Fallout mechanics, where you're not taking a skill test across difficult terrain. You're just spending momentum or adding to threat, essentially just to try and press through that difficult terrain, that deep water, that heavy snow, to hop over that barricade. And if you need to make a skill test to generate those points, you can, but you've got the option just to push past them with momentum or add to threat. And as I was discussing I think it was on our Facebook group the other day, if someone's crossing dangerous or risky terrain and they've done so by adding to threat, that provides me with an opportunity for something to happen because of that terrain.
Love that. Good. So
last question. I just wanted I pick Nathan's brain a little bit, and also Alan, Michael, get your perspectives. So this is all absolutely fantastic information about threat momentum as players and game masters. So let's put ourselves in the heads of a new game master coming into the game. Like, is it intimidating for them to see all these possibilities and not only do they have to understand how to effectively use threat, right, but they have to effectively teach their players how to effectively use threat. So if I'm a new game master, maybe just in general to the hobby, maybe not just to Star Trek Adventures, like what's your one piece of advice to for me to be able to sit down with my group with a quick start or the core book and just kind of jump into the game and get started making use of all these awesome mechanics that we've been talking about?
I would say I'm actually going to draw a little bit of wisdom from a colleague who worked on first edition, no longer works with Modiphius, who always described the use of threat to her group as being essentially like the fuel of the game. They were there. The points were there to make things more exciting, and it was up to the players how much they put their foot on the pedal. If they wanted a roller coaster of a game, put the pedal down hard. Throw as much threat as they can at the GM and expect the GM to spend it back. And you'll get the most exciting game that way. Sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want something more sedate, so you'll approach threat a bit more cautiously, and that's fine too. It's up to the players how much they want to feed that particular engine, how much fuel they want to pump into the story. From the GM perspective, don't be afraid of spending it. I find so many GMs that either don't know what to do when the players start adding to threat because they've not spent it and they've let it build up, and now they've got 15, 20 points and don't know what to do with it because they think they have to spend it all in one big thing, where really most of the time, most scenes, you can get away spending 2 or 3 points, and that's it. And that'll just keep things ticking over. And then every so often, you want to hold back a little, and every so often, and those give you that surplus that you need if you want something big to happen later. It's not difficult to get to grips with it if you stop and take a breath and think about what you actually want to achieve, or not necessarily want to achieve, but want to nudge things in the direction of. Because you don't control the story, but you've got influence on it through the mechanics too, and you can nudge and push and direct things. You can't make the NPCs succeed or fail, but you can certainly have them put in more effort. You've just taken down 2 Klingon warriors. Their comrade wants revenge, so he's going to buy some extra dice.
Yeah. My advice as we get toward wrap up is I really look at the 3-act structure when I'm playing the game with my players. And Act 1, I'm actually not going to come at them with a lot of threat because I actually want to collect a lot of it. Why? Because in TVs and movies, by the end of Act 2, there's so many problems. And that's where I'm saying my threat is in Act 2 to build up all these complications, all this multifaceted layered issues for them. And like in the movies, Act 3 is them working their way through all those obstacles in order to have success. So I start toning down. So sometimes, and it's okay, GMs, listen to this, I will end games and there's still 12 threats sitting in the pool because I just don't need them in Act 3. They have so many problems to unwind and the tension is already high enough. It's okay to have leftover threat at the end of the game. And again, you can use that leftover threat for a reversal to let the bad guy get away or whatever you want to do at that point.
And the players can even treat that as a victory. They managed to they took risks and they got away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do with a group is just talk about characters that they've seen in movies that they really enjoy or television shows that they really enjoy. And then we have a discussion. Well, do you enjoy them because they had an easy path through their story? And 100% of the time it's no, we love those characters so much because their story was so hard. And I equate threat to that. Like the reason why so many people love Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones is because he has gone through so much and has come out the better on the other side. So I like to explain that to my players. And then if you do find yourself at a table where players aren't really excited to give you threat, there are little sneaky ways that you can kind of manipulate that. Like if you if you improve the threat range of a roll or something like that, you might be able to or complication range, I should say, you might be able to gain a little threat back if they roll complications. There's lots of different ways that the system works so that you can keep on pushing that right towards the end.
Wonderful.
And I'll just add a shameless plug. Just all this great advice on threat and momentum. I know Nathan and we collectively put a lot of time and effort into the Player's Guide and Game Master's Guide, adding a lot more advice around threat and momentum. And I haven't looked at them recently, but I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of that advice is going to port right over in the second edition without much effort at all. In fact, some of it is in second edition, right? Just adapted. But I think a lot of that content from the PG and the GMG are still going to be totally applicable because it's just good general information about effective uses of threat and momentum. So, don't sleep on those books if you get an opportunity to check them out.
A lot of it ended up in the GM kit or the game toolkit.
Well, and people have told me, people who don't even play Star Trek Adventures, that they bought them because they're just generally good books on on how GM and players can play in a game. So those are still gold. Awesome. Well, cool. We're back to gratitude now. So until next time, where we're going to be talking about traits and how to get the most out of traits in 2E. My gratitude is actually going to go to all of my players in the USS Pioneer game. This would include Al Spader, Josh Allen, Troy Mepians, Aaron Paulier, Michael Freeman, my current player group, who really have stepped into it and fallen forward with threat. And we have some really amazing games. So I appreciate them as I got to refine my skills as a game master and really figuring out how best to use threat. All right, Al, why don't we send gratitude your way next?
I want to send gratitude to all of the players out there who are working hard to create content for Star Trek Adventures and putting down their reactions to second edition online, Final Frontiersman, Fluff and Crunch, Tabletop Journeys, all their stuff, their insights are always valuable. And I think that, getting the information out there now that they have it, they're helping us, spread the word. And so thank you for doing that.
Nice. Nathan, and then we'll send it off with Jim.
Yeah, I would like to extend my gratitude to the rest of the development team. Over the last few years, we've had a new game development team build up here in Nottingham. So I actually have an office to visit a couple of times a week, in addition to working from home. And their assistants and their just having other people to bounce ideas off of and to collaborate with and to test things with in a smaller, more specific, more targeted tests was an invaluable part of second edition design that I didn't have. I didn't have those kinds of resources or those kind of additional people to support me when I was working on first edition, and I think second edition is all the better for having had more eyes on it during development and more perspectives and more voices involved in its development.
Yep, and that was thanks for thanks for that. I was going to thank Nathan and the dev team for all the hard work that they did on second edition, in addition to all the playtesting they did. All the playtesters that are listed in the acknowledgments that you'll see in the core book. The two different, I think there was a couple different stores in Nottingham that hosted the playtesting events, but big thanks to Sophie and Dom and Justin and Nathan, of course, Andy and Jess, and anybody else either at Modiphius or just in the playtesting world there who helped out. Huge help that they all provided. Really appreciate it. And then also thanks to all the fans. Again, I was talking about this on one of the social media channels. I don't remember which one, but this second edition has kind of been in development for 7 years, right? Because I mean, we didn't know it at the time, but first edition came out 7 years ago, and then the dev team and Nathan went on to do Dune and Dreams and Machines and Fallout and so many other different things. All that stuff was the 2D20 circle of life. We all kind of came back to Star Trek Adventures, and without the fans, we would not be doing a second edition, right? Like, you've supported this game for 7 years. We've been able to grow the game in 7 years. We've added new licenses to it. We've gotten more series. We've just continued to charge forward with the game, and the fans. I mean, frankly, capitalist world, right? If you weren't buying the game, we wouldn't be making it anymore. So you've bought the game, you played the game, you love the game, you are talking about it online. You're doing your social media, and you're doing your Twitches and your YouTubes and so on and so forth. You're contributing to continuing mission with all that fantastic fan content. And so thanks to all the fans for making second edition happen. Really, I mean, it's bottom line is you made this happen, especially with your feedback over the last 7 years, right? All the questions you've had about the game, about the rule sets, all your experiences, all that stuff. We've been ingesting that for 7 years now, and it's been informing all of our different games to some, to one degree or another. So thank you for all that feedback. Really appreciate it.
All right. So the conversation continues until next time. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to you again soon.